I'm delighted to be joined now by former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and Conservative MP for Chipping Barnet, Theresa Villiers. Lovely to see you this morning, Theresa. Thank you very much for coming in. Really difficult weekend for Tories, particularly MPs in London, as you are. What's your reaction to the local election results?
Well, they're a really bleak set of results for the Conservatives. There's no getting around that. We do need to reflect on them. I think one of the only mitigations is that when these seats were last contested, it was 2021, and we were at the peak of a vaccine bounce. So
yes,
our results were, the best we'd had since 2008.
I know, but they are the worst now in more than 40 years. And I suppose the question on everyone's lips is, what needs to change? Because Rishi Sunak, and I'm sure Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, will come on and say, well, we've got to stick to the plan. The plan isn't working, is it?
I think in London we fought quite a negative campaign, and we need to reflect on that and start thinking about a more positive message. But nationally, I think, at the heart of this is ensuring that we're raising living standards, that people feel better off and that they know we've got a plan for that to continue.
But do you think people do feel they're better off after 14 years of Tory rule? I mean, I think polling suggests that people really don't, and that's a massive problem. People don't think that a Conservative administration has advanced them.
We need to do more, clearly. We've made some progress. Inflation's hard, wages are rising, there's 4 million more people in work. And only a week or so ago, people had a £900 tax cut. So there is real progress, but these results show that it's not enough. And we've got to make sure we deliver in the months prior to the general election.
When you say that the campaign was too negative in London, are you holding Susan Hall responsible for that? Do you think she attacked Sadiq Khan too much? What are you saying?
I think it was. I think they ran a campaign which was understandable in the circumstances, given the grave concern felt about Sadiq Khan's record, but it hasn't worked, and we need to think about how we do things differently next time. And for example, look again at the national picture. We've got a revolutionary, incredibly radical offer on childcare. That's going to make a huge difference to young families the length and breadth of the country.
I know, but isn't it?
We're not really talking about that kind of thing.
I know, because the macro picture of sort of 14 years of Tory failure and this idea that the Conservatives aren't representative of their own voters anymore is overshadowing all of the detail. So you can be talking about little pockets of policy, and we can agree that maybe he did have a good week last week, Rishi Sunak, with Rwanda appearing to be a deterrent, particularly for migrants who have now crossed the Irish Sea to try and get into Ireland. But the macro picture is one of failure, and it's one of a lack of hope. And how do you reverse that?
We do have a strong record. We've delivered a huge amount. I mean, for example, reading standards in schools are hugely better than they were when we came to office as a result of Conservative reforms, which were opposed by Labour every step of the way. And I think we do need to address concerns of people who are switching to reform or thinking about doing that.
How do you do that, do you think?
Well, I think we have to emphasise that, if they vote reform, they will end up with a Labour government.
I know, but then that argument isn't that persuasive, because it's almost saying, well, the Conservatives aren't great, but Labour's even worse, therefore don't vote reform. It needs to be a much more positive offer than that. I mean, I appreciate you're in a really difficult position, and I'm not going to go really hard on you because you're not actually on cabinet. You're a Tory MP. You're fighting for your life in Barnet. Your majority is what? 1,212.
Yes, that's right.
Are you really worried about losing your seat?
Well, it was always going to be a tough contest. I'm absolutely up for the fight, and I've got a good track record to stand on. But yes, these results
Barnet and
do
Camden's gone Labour, hasn't it? Barnet and Camden is Labour. That was that portion of London in the mayoral elections that voted for Khan. I mean, and this is intriguing as well, because obviously I would associate Barnet with being quite a Jewish area. Everything that we've seen with the pro-Palestinian marches, I mean, your constituents can't be particularly happy with Khan at the moment. So what's happened? They're not happy with Khan, but they're not happy with the Tories either.
Well, the count doesn't this time round distinguish between different constituencies within one GLA constituency. So there's obviously a huge Labour voting.
Part of your constituency has come out in favour of Khan.
The results obviously show that the Barnet and Camden GLA constituency backed Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, but that's a terrible indictment when you consider that your constituents, some of your constituents, because I know that area, I'm from Hertfordshire, some of your constituents are Jewish and must be really, really worried about how Khan has handled the pro-Palestinian marches and situation. And yet still you can't make headway.
I don't think one can categorise or make statements about the whole of the Jewish population in Barnet. But yes, many of my Jewish constituents have expressed grave concern about how the marches have been policed. And along with them, I've sent in several complaints, reported a number of incidents to the police. Clearly, there were a range of factors that determine how people voted in the mayoral election.
I mean, the government said they've got confidence in Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Police Chief Commissioner. I'm wondering whether some of the Jews in your constituency have that confidence. Have they spoken to you about it?
Some have certainly called on him to go.
Yeah.
As I say, there isn't a uniform view. One of Mark Rowley's problems is that the law is very restrictive in terms of what protests and demonstrations can be banned. I think there is a good case for changing the law. At the moment, the police can only ban a march if there's a fear of serious public disorder. I think in deciding whether a march is permitted or not, the police should be able to take into account the cumulative impact of successive marches and their impact on community cohesion and potential hate crime.
That's interesting. So if you change the law, I mean, is that something that you're lobbying for behind the scenes? How much Conservative support is there for that? Because we keep on having this kind of buck passing going on between the government saying that the police have the powers and the police saying that they don't have the powers. You seem to be siding with the idea that more legislation is needed to clamp down on what's been happening in the capital since October the 7th.
I think it is. This is a suggestion that came from Lord Wolney in the House of Lords in the work that he did on these issues for the government, and I would like to see that go forward. We have seen some tightening the laws on protests. For example, people can now be arrested if they refuse to remove face coverings. But we need to go further because I just don't think I don't think we should carry on as we are with, a community afraid to go into the centre of our capital city on a Saturday for fear of being intimidated or harassed as a result of their faith.
I mean, you were a leading Brexiteer during the referendum campaign. What's your reaction to what's been going on between Rishi Sunak and the Irish Taoiseach, Simon Harris, with regard to these migrants now trying to get into the EU via Northern Ireland to Ireland?
Well, there is a sort of certain irony here in that the Irish government they almost kind of weaponised the issues around the north-south border, and they were very ideological about it. And now to turn around a few months later and start sort of suggesting the potential for some kind of police checks on the border, which I gather they've now retreated from. But it does, I think, it's early stages, but it does seem to show that the Rwanda scheme, even though it's not yet operational, is starting to impact on migrant behaviour.
But when you campaigned with the likes of Boris Johnson and Michael Gove talking about taking back control of our borders, as a Brexiteer, you cannot be happy with the notion of legal migration being at 745,000 last year, let alone illegal migration being out of control. What must the government do to bring these numbers down? And should there be a cap on legal migration, perhaps?
The overall levels of migration are too high. They do need to come down. When you've got sort of 600,000 plus net migration, it's just not feasible for the country to accommodate that kind of population increase.
Well, it's also a betrayal of those who voted for Brexit thinking it would bring immigration down, isn't it?
Well, it does need to come down. And we're seeing, for example, the number of dependents of students have come down dramatically since the rules were changed. And we're also cracking down in all sorts of ways on workers bringing independence, and obviously the Rwanda scheme is hopefully going to be operational within a few weeks. But do you accept
that the immigration levels being as high as they are, unprecedented levels of immigration, is a betrayal of people who voted for Brexit to control borders better? It is a betrayal, isn't it?
Look, I wouldn't describe it like that, but we do need to get these numbers down. They're not sustainable.
But this is one of the
high.
main reasons why people are defecting to reform. That's why I make this point. This controlling immigration, or the lack of the government's ability to do so, has pushed people into the arms of Richard Tice and Nigel Farage. So it's an absolute urgent priority to bring down legal migration, let alone illegal.
Yes.
Why would anyone have faith in the government doing that when these are the numbers that the Tories have been presiding over? These are sort of Blairite numbers, and the Tories have been presiding over them.
Yes, and they need to come down, and they are, in certain sectors, they are coming down. Applications via visa routes in certain sectors are coming down as well.
Final question, Theresa. If you could phone Rishi Sunak tomorrow and give him one piece of advice of how to try and rescue this situation, what would it be?
Make sure we deliver the plan to raise living standards, cut taxes, keep inflation falling.
And what if the people say the plan isn't working? Change the plan or stick to the plan?
Well, we have to deliver on our manifesto, and we have to make sure people's living standards are rising.
All right, Theresa Villiers, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. I appreciate it's not an easy morning to come onto the broadcast round, so thank you very much indeed.